It's August 1st, 2020, and that means two things. Number one, there's a new edition of Shutter Magazine that just went live. And number two, it's time for a Photoshop art breakdown. Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. I'm David Bird with Reality Reimagined. I'm an award-winning photographer and Photoshop artist that specializes in fantasy composite art. The August edition of Shutter Magazine is live. It's the lighting edition. There's a lot of great content in that magazine about lighting, photography, Photoshop, business, marketing, and so forth. If you've never heard of Shutter Magazine, I strongly recommend that you check it out. You can both read the magazine online or subscribe for an annual subscription where you get the printed copy for a very affordable price. Go to behindtheshutter.com and you can learn more about the magazine. You can also pick up printed copies of the magazine at Barnes & Noble and other places where magazines are sold. I cannot recommend that magazine enough because every month there is great content that covers different genres of photography, business, Photoshop, artwork. It's endless. It's the nation's leading magazine in photography education, so please go to behindtheshutter.com and check it out. But in my article for the August edition, I talk about how to evolve lighting patterns, to take what you know and what you're comfortable with and evolve it to get more creative results. And one of the images in that article is this image, and it's the subject of today's Photoshop art breakdown. What I want to do is to talk about the photography that went into play and then take you layer by layer on how this was created, pointing out two special parts of this piece of art. First and foremost, the heavy lifting that's in it from Oniric by Composite Nation. Oniric is a third-party program for Photoshop CC 2018 and above. It creates non-destructive glows and light streaks in images. It is an amazing program that has single-handedly changed my artwork forever. I highly recommend that you check out Oniric by Composite Nation. There will be a link in the description below. This image also features a new third custom set of brushes that I've created for Photoshop to use inside of Photoshop, but you can also use it in conjunction with Oniric to create some really truly amazing shapes, lights, glows, and streaks to put into custom artwork like this Cyberpunk gelled glamour image. So we're going to dive into Photoshop and take a look at this piece, but again, just let me mention in the description below is a link to behindtheshutter.com, which is Shutter Magazine, Oniric by Composite Nation, and then of course the custom brushes that you can find on my website. Now, with all of that said, let's hit up the Photoshop and take a look at this piece of gel glamour artwork from the August edition of Shutter Magazine. As always, to get us started, let's make some introductions. This is my wonderful friend Danielle. She is both brilliant in front of the camera as well as behind it, and you can see more of her amazing artwork by going to her Instagram account at the link below. So let's first talk about the camera that I use. I use the Canon EOS R with an EF 24 to 70 millimeter lens. The settings for the camera were f11, ISO 400, and a shutter speed of 1/160th of a second. The lighting that's used, I used 3 Godox AD600 strobes. 2 of them, one is on camera left and camera right, both of those had 12 by 55 inch strip boxes with a grid inside of them, and both of them have the same purple gel material. The third light is boomed above the model using a 33 inch beauty dish with a blue gel but no grid, so that ultimately we would have a bigger wash of blue on top of the model so that it could interact with the different purples that we see in the scene. The light that is on camera right, I physically moved it further away from the model and turned up the power of the light so that ultimately I would have a disparity between the two purples. Why would I want to do that? Because if I'm using 2 lights that both have the same color of purple coming through them, they're powered at the same power settings, they're equidistant from each other to the model, then that's the same color of purple coming in on both sides of this image. By changing the color just a little bit to get that purple into that light pink and light magenta and light purple, it creates more visual interest for the audience so that hopefully the audience will stay with the picture just a little bit longer, especially as they start analyzing not only the story that they see, but some of the colors and the photography itself. So that's the image. Once I brought it into Photoshop, I went through the process of running it through Adobe Camera Raw and then did a full retouch using frequency separation, dodging and burning, and so forth. Now, if those retouching techniques are new to you, then take a look at the card above, and at the end of this video, that will take you to the retouching series here on the channel where we do a deep dive into all of those retouching techniques. Once the retouch was complete, then I simply extracted Danielle from the background layer so that we would have a layer mask so that I could ultimately start building a composite to create the final piece of artwork that was in the August edition of Shutter magazine. This type of composite I call a postcard composite, where we do not see the subject's feet, so we don't have to make it believable that they're actually there. This is the type of composite that you usually see in a movie poster or other artwork like that, because you can use varying different elements in the background to help tell the overall story, who this character is, where they came from, where they're going, what this story is about. And that was what I chose to make in this final piece. So first and foremost, for the composite, what we need is a background. So I used this texture because first, it has the same color palette that I used on set, but it has some interesting elements of overall luminosity values that I want to point out. There's some dark elements of purple up here and down here. We have the lighter blues in the center and lighter purples and so forth within the center. This is the beginning of a vignette of dark purple around the scene, where ultimately the outside of the texture is darker than the inside. A vignette is a design tool that you can use to help push the audience's focus toward the subject. I knew Danielle would be right in the center of this piece, so I did want an overall vignette to be on the outside. So to start shaping up this texture into what I wanted for my composite, I used 2 solid color adjustment layers here that started to shift the colors closer to that purple and that blue and limiting all the other colors so we got to that color palette that I wanted. Then I had a blank layer that I just painted a little bit of a darker purple through here to start completing the vignette. Then I made a composite layer of all of those combined into one layer, and I wound up painting just a little bit of a lighter purple down here because as I started building the piece, it just didn't work to have that dark corner for the elements that I was adding into the scene. With this one composite layer of everything, I ran this through a motion blur, and you can find that by coming up to Filter, Blur, and then Motion Blur. In the motion blur, I did it at a 90-degree angle, and I did a pretty significant amount of motion blur so that we get this final result, which is this beautiful streak of light and color, which is indicative of the overall feeling that I wanted in this scene, and it's the perfect background to start building on in our new document. So I created a new document that's an 18 by 24 inch at 300 DPI. Let's look at the very top of the layer stack. This is the final piece, a culmination of all the layers we're going to take a look at, run through an artistic process to enhance color, light, and detail into the final elements of this. Now, when I create a composite, I ultimately create the new document and I bring in the subject, and then I start bringing in the background elements, and I start building new elements behind the subject or above them in the layer stack. I work organically in that process. I don't work in a linear progression where I start with background and then textures and so forth, and then subject, and then moving on from there. But for the purposes of the video, I do want to take you layer by layer and show you how it was built. So starting with that texture that we just mentioned, we have it here. I duplicated that texture layer. And with this layer mask that you can see, anything that's painted black is hiding this layer. Anything that's painted white is revealing this layer. So ultimately, this layer is just a circle of the texture by itself, so that I could clip a piece of city stock that I purchased from Adobe. This piece of city stock clipped to the circle is starting to build those elements that help tell this story of who Danielle is, who this character is, where she's coming from, and so forth. So this piece of city stock is an image of Hong Kong, again, purchased from Adobe. I like this because it has a lot of blue into it. And then I just simply faded out the top of it so it would fade off into nothingness as it incorporated with the background itself. The next layer in the layer stack is a blank layer, and this features the third custom set of brushes that I've created for Photoshop. They're on the Reality Reimagined website, and they're called Oniric. Oniric. Because when you type it, it looks really cool, and then when you have to say it to people, it's really difficult because it's like Oniric. Aura-hex. Orange, you glad you're not a banana. Like, so I call it Aura-hex. Aura-hex by Reality Reimagined. It smells delicious. These are hex patterns, this brush set. It comes with an individual hex pattern in 3 different widths, and then different combinations of the hex patterns in different shapes. And it has a set of hex patterns with hex patterns inside the hex patterns to make a diamond hex, or a hex, by Reality Reimagined. There's a link in the description below. So this blank layer, I painted white with the Aura Hex brushes, and then I changed the layers blending mode to color dodge so that the white of the brush would dodge the colors beneath it, which is the city stock and the textures and potentially other elements that I may bring into play. So the next piece that's in this is another piece of a stock purchase from Adobe. This is a heads-up display that just has some numbers and letters on it and shapes that is kind of indicative of that sci-fi cyberpunk feeling. It was just another subtle texture or layer to work into this scene. Then I also brought in a particle field. It's a dark blue background with orange particles of varying sizes and luminosity values, and then used a layer mask with a custom haze brush that I have created to paint them in so that ultimately it's not a full layer of particles, but just worked into the scene in varying little bits and pieces. The next layer is a texture layer. It's a gray texture that has a natural vignette built into it. When this is brought in and the blending mode has been changed to soft light, then before and after, we can see that that gray is deepening the color, darkening it just a little bit, but because the center of the texture is brighter, it's letting the original lights show through. So that vignette, you can already see it's starting to push your focus toward the brighter center of this piece. The next element is a custom pattern that I created in Photoshop. It's very simple. It's just white and black columns that is seamless. This was an adjustment layer as a pattern adjustment layer that has had the blending mode changed to soft light so that the white and black interact on a soft light, which means it's ignoring gray and letting it blend through 50% gray and letting it blend through so that we see the pattern subtly within the overall piece. The next two layers are blank layers, and they are featuring brushes from the original custom set of brushes that I created for Photoshop. On the website, the name has been changed. They are called Aura and Streaks Edition 1 and Edition 2 because there's a new set of both shapes that are indicative for the background or appropriate for the background, as well as streak brushes to use inside of Oniric or with Photoshop. So these two layers have a circle and a triangular shape. Again, I painted them with white and then just changed the blending mode to color dodge so the white brush would interact with the colors beneath it to help start pulling in some of those elements and that visual allure of light and color. Then we have the layer of Danielle. Again, when I made this, I made the original document, I brought in the texture in Danielle, and then started building all the stuff behind her. Ultimately, so I would know where the different shapes of the brushes, the Aura Hex brushes needed to be, and so forth. So now, once that's built, this is a postcard composite that's complete, as far as I'm concerned. It could go through the artistic enhancement if you want to, but I want to show you how much of a difference Oniric makes to the artwork. This by itself is just fine. And I can do some finalization in Photoshop of enhancing some of the luminosity values strategically to start pulling in the highlights from the actual photography and make those a little bit brighter, make the colors brighter, and it's done. But Oniric makes such a difference. It's such a wonderful program to use. I highly recommend it. There's a link in the description below for Composite Nation. So this layer here is blank. And what I did was I started painting white using the pen tool and painting white onto this. This is a Nerf gun, by the way. And I started painting white into the different crevices on the Nerf gun so that I could use Oniric to give it a glow and a color. So once this layer was created and I painted those different streaks into the scene, what I did in the original document was I made a new blank layer that is beneath the one where I just painted, and I filled that with the color black so that I can separate this layer and take just that through Oniric. Once that's done, this is the layer that it produced here, and it's got that beautiful glow. Paying attention to things like threshold, radius, exposure, and colorization in Oniric under the diffuse option in Oniric. So once this was produced, I had a choice. I can leave this original layer on. This was the original layer where I painted white to create this, or I can turn it off. If I turn it off, we do see the white center core from what Oniric produced and the glow. But if I leave it on, that glow is just a little bit stronger because the white is still there. The Oniric glow is above it in the layer stack, so that's why we see it, but the original white layer is beneath. If I hit Controller Command and the number 0 to zoom all the way back out, without the original layer and with, the gun just stands out a little bit more. So it has a good feeling there. Then what I did was add a second special effect to the barrel of the gun. This was the same process. I made a blank layer, I painted white circles, took it into Oniric, and gave it a colorization of orange so that the barrel would ultimately feel like there's some cool sci-fi lights inside of this space age futuristic gun, and then I painted a little bit of a haze coming into it. I chose orange, not so much to make it feel like it had been fired, but orange and blue are opposite of each other on the color wheel. So there's a little bit of color harmony. This is one subtle little third color that I'm working into the scene, but it's very minimal. Again, helps to kind of point out the gun and helps tell a little bit of that story. So that was the second special effect run through Oniric. Then what I did was I turned off the layer of Danielle and then ran all of this minus the special effects for the gun through Oniric so that it would produce a background of glow, interacting with all the layers, the textures, the shapes, everything was being picked up by Oniric and creating that. Now you can see a silhouette of Danielle because I used the layer mask that came with a layer that Oniric output, and I painted black on it so that that glow would not cover her. It would not be in front of her. And then I did the same process as I've done for the special effects and for the background. I separated Danielle by herself with a layer of black and then gave her a glow as well. Controller Command 0 to zoom all the way back out. If I turn off the layer of Danielle, you can see this is what it picked up and created this glow on this top layer here. And with the layer of Danielle turned on, she has a custom glow just to her. Oniric picks up the luminosity values within the image, and you have controls inside of Oniric, like exposure and threshold, to let Oniric see a lot of that light or take some of that away. And then I just let the natural colors be the colorization of this glow. She has a glow, the background has a glow. The gun has its special effects, and all of that combined into this final layer with some enhancement, final artistic enhancements to the image, creates this postcard composite of cyberpunk gelled glamour artwork. Let's finish up with some final thoughts on this video today. Postcard composites are one of my favorite types of composites to create because you have a lot of freedom to be able to use those shapes and textures and stock images to start augmenting the story of your subject. However, you have to make sure that those background elements are just augmenting the story. They don't become the story itself. The subject of your final artwork has to be the audience's invitation to this world. And the background needs to be almost like a treasure map where they can start deciphering bits and pieces of it to get a glimpse of what this story holds for them as they go down that journey of your artwork. Check out behindtheshutter.com and Shutter Magazine. There is great education to be found in that magazine every single month. Go to compositenation.com to learn more about Oniric and pick up your copy, and then go to Reality Reimagined to pick up your copy of the custom brushes, including Aurahex by Reality Reimagined, so you can start creating some amazing gel glamour artwork or whatever artwork you want to use with it. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you like the content you found in the video, make sure to give the video a like and consider subscribing because new content debuts each week in photography and Photoshop education. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell icon so you'll be notified of that new content when you return to the YouTubes. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, I'll see you out there in the world of Photoshop.